How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Infinite Sports, but it's more of a Infinite Sports Sloppy Saturdays collaboration, as we are going to be conducting our very early mock draft of the first round. So I am joined by, once again, Matassa, the host of the Sloppy Saturdays podcast.
What's going on, everybody? So yeah, we are going over our first mock draft. We're going to go over the first round, all 32 picks. We both said this might be broken into parts as well. We'll give you guys all 32, and we might do again separated into top 10 as well into different episodes. But yeah, me and Ken are kind of like making a pact over the last couple of days, saying that we want to be the guys that really highlight the draft. Obviously, with my college football knowledge, Ken's NFL knowledge, and both of ours, again, NFL and college football knowledge. We thought we had good chemistry on one of my last episodes, going over again the players and going over the fits. So we're going to go over again all 32 picks. I think it will be fun. Might be one of our longer episodes, but hey, we want to cover this whole entire draft for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some long episodes in the past, so this is really going to be no different. So basically, we'll make a selection. We'll go through the first round, like I said. Um, we'll break down the pick for each team in the first round. Talk about the fit, and maybe like what other potential fits. You know, with the teams. Some other players maybe. Obviously like the Raiders, we kind of know where they're going, but like for some of these other teams, there could be one player we select, and we could say, hey, maybe this player could be a good fit. So that's basically what this episode is going to be. Very early mock draft, and obviously things are going to change once we get to free agency down the line. We'll have a different mock draft that comes out. That make sure to check out when that does come out prior to the draft. So
Yeah, I think again that's what I wanted to highlight from before. Like again, this is our early one. We'll do one like week of post free agency, basically free agency moves, because again these picks could definitely change depending on what teams do in free agency, and the team's needs like obviously will change based on what they do in free agency. Also, I did want to discuss too, when we go over these picks, we're going to highlight potential trades that could happen for teams at certain slots. But this is just a straight up mock without any trades. But we're also going to highlight again like the trade possibilities as well.
yeah, so I guess we could start off with the number one overall pick, which is probably the easiest one.
Yeah.
Um,
So again, at number one, obviously, like you said, and like we've said multiple times, obviously me and Ken have been doing drafts for a while. A lot of times we like use the notion that the draft starts at two or the draft starts at three, based on again like usually for the number one pick doesn't always happen. The team that selects in the number one pick needs a quarterback. That's most likely why they're at number one, and there's usually a consensus number one overall quarterback. Now for this draft, there is a possibility that maybe very similar to last year, a team could jump back into the first round later and draft a quarterback, or again, the second half, maybe one other quarterback could go. But for right now, really the only consensus first round quarterback, and then again, number one pick is Fernando Mendoza. I think Ken could definitely agree with this. For me, I think right now it really all comes to timing for the Raiders. Why this is the consensus number one overall pick. Not only was Fernando Mendoza the most consistent player throughout the year in college football, and again, you can't take anything away from him. Flawless season, 16-0, won the Heisman, won the national championship. But just based on the Raiders' like trajectory and where they were going, I mean, we saw them go for a Geno Smith. We saw them go for a Jimmy Garoppolo. So they tried the veteran move that hasn't really worked out. They bring in an offensive-minded coach in Clint Kubiak, who a lot of us are high on, and then again they have pieces on this offense: Aston Genthy, Brock Bowers, who they drafted in the last couple of years, that could also grow with Fernando Mendoza. Now, for me personally, I am not high on Fernando Mendoza as high as other people are. I think he has the ceiling to be again maybe a back end top 10 quarterback. He wouldn't be my selection at the first overall pick, but again, it is projections. He wasn't even my top quarterback when I went over to quarterbacks, which could shock a lot of people. But I don't really want to go into that today. But Fernando Mendoza, again, he is probably the most pro ready quarterback when you talk about, again, the ability to be accurate on all three levels. And then again, his prototypical size as well, and playing for this powerhouse program and great coach like Kurt Signetti. So he does have an opportunity to grow in Vegas. My biggest concerns, I've said it time and time again, you really have the ability to be a dual threat quarterback in today's NFL. We see again when you look at the top half quarterbacks in the NFL, very few of them football to any. And I believe Fernando Mendoza, he has an awkward running style, and he has the ability to extend some plays here and there in big moments for Indiana. I believe that gap's going to close even more because the again NFL is a lot faster. They have way more faster players when you talk about the depth of an entire defense. And I think his inability to extend plays at a very high level, and you look at the offensive line for the Raiders, again, I don't really know how that's going to work out. I'm not super high on Fernando Mendoza. I don't think he's an elite quarterback prospect. But again, this isn't a very deep quarterback class where, again, we said there may not be another quarterback that goes in the first round, possibly at the end of the first round. So, again, with your trajectory of the Raiders and him being consistent all season, this is the number one pick. And I think everybody could agree that this is going to be the number one pick.
Yeah, really no pushback on that. It's most likely he's going to be the selection, and it's going to be a very tough situation to be put in. I am a big fan of the Clint Kubiak hire, getting an offensive-minded head coach in there. It's going to take some time. Now, it's not like he doesn't have anything around him. He's going to have Ashton Genty, he's going to have Brock Bowers, but there's a ton of work that needs to be done with this Raiders team on both sides of the ball. They're not great at protecting the quarterback. They don't have a lot of skill position players. Like there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get this program up and running out in Vegas, getting them on the right path. But also the fact that they just play in one of the toughest divisions in football with the Chargers, the Broncos, and you figure the Chiefs are going to be better next year once again with the healthy Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, it might be a rough couple years, and we'll see what happens if they can get uh, this team turned around.
All right, so that takes us to the number two New York Jets. Now, for the New York Jets, I believe they are kind of in a little bit of a weird spot at number two. We were talking about teams that could trade back. It is possible, but at the same time, when you talk about trading back for some of these teams, you kind of have to have the demand to trade back, and usually that comes within quarterback needy teams. The Jets are a team that needs a quarterback, but there is no quarterback, like we said, that could be selected within the next 15 picks. So now you kind of go off of again, I think there is still a lot of debate for who could be selected number two pick, but now you go, what position is going to give you the most value? That's my theory on it. When you're talking about not selecting a quarterback, then you turn to edges, linebackers, maybe guys that could really bring up a whole defense and make a defense elite. Now, for this pick, for me personally, I believe there were two guys that you could really debate, possibly even three. I believe Avril Reese is going to be the pick, so let me go and select him. But at the same time, I also think it could very easily be David Bailey. And then I also think you could throw in Ruben Bain in the mix as well. So those are three different edge rushers. Why I lean for Avril Reese, one, obviously the pedigree at Ohio State is phenomenal. But why I really leaned on him is I believe this is the guy that has the more upside. I think when you look at David Bailey as an edge, this is a guy that could be a set edge rusher and be a set contributor day one in the NFL. Avril Reese is a little more of a project, not necessarily a project, but a guy with more upside. When you look at Avril Reese, you're kind of looking at somebody who can mold into that Micah Parsons role. When you look at a linebacker that could drop into coverage, or again, a guy that could play on the edge and distribute sacks, I think Avril Reese is a guy that could play a little bit more all over the field and has that versatility, which brings more upside at the pick. That's why I like him a little more to the Jets. Again, it's all going to come down to development as well. And then also when you look at the Jets, why I love them so much going defense. Again, we don't know how much longer he's gonna be his coach based on again the season they had last year. But them having a defensive coach in Aaron Glenn, I do think they're gonna go defense. Again, I like Avril Reese. You could argue David Bailey. You could argue Ruben Bain as well. Again, I do think David Bailey is more of the product that's going to transition a little easier right away. But I do think he's that set edge rusher that plays one position. And again, he played for a phenomenal defense. So we're going to talk about him again in a couple more picks. But I think Avril Reese is the guy that definitely brings a little more upside when you talk about a guy that could play all over the field, multiple positions. And a lot of people look at that Micah Parsons type player and how he could change an entire defense by being able to have that versatility. And I think Averill Reese, like I said, could mold into that.
Yeah, so with the Jets, I mean, they are one of those teams, like you said, like I've said, that could trade out, trade down. I think really for them, especially with these first couple of picks, because the quarterback class is pretty weak this season, this upcoming draft, that they really should put an emphasis on the defensive side of the ball and go all defense or mostly defense with their picks. With the moves they made at the trade deadline, they pretty much gutted their entire defense, trading Quinn and Williams, trading Sauce Gardner. So, and like you said, with the defensive minded head coach and Aaron Glenn, you got to make this defense more respectable again and build it back up to, similar to what it was a couple years ago. And again, it's amazing how this defense went from being, a strong unit, under Robert Saleh to what it was, this season and after, what they did at the trade deadline. I mean, they're giving up an average of like 25 points a game, so um really defense I think is what the Jets should do. Obviously, if this was a strong quarterback class, we'd be saying a completely different thing. Obviously, Dante Moore was someone that was connected to the Jets, but he's going to be going back to school, so that kind of took him out of it. Could the Jets still take a quarterback in this draft? Absolutely, in the later rounds. But yeah, here I either see them trading down or taking a defensive player.
Yeah, and like you said with the Jets, just to basically cap them off at this pick, I think the Jets are in a little bit of a better position than other teams that are, again, don't have a quarterback and aren't a contending team right now. Because you look at the Jets with the multitude of picks that they have, like you said, if they wanted to take a quarterback, trade up at the back end of the first, they also technically kind of have three first because they have pick 16 in this draft and they also have pick 33. So again, you're one pick out of the second round as well. And then you have another second round pick on top of that, along with we know they have the Colts pick next year and they have the Cowboys pick next year. So this is a team with like a lot of draft capital. So again, if you want to ride this year out, either not select the quarterback or again select the quarterback a little later, that again maybe they have upside, maybe they don't, or you go bridge quarterback. You do have a multitude of picks to rebuild this team, where some of the teams just don't. I get it, the Jets are really bad; they've been bad basically our whole entire life, but they do have a multitude of picks to fix things up if they make the right decisions. So Averill Reese is at 2. Now coming at number 3 for the Cardinals, I do kind of feel like the Cardinals are in a little bit of a weird spot. And what I mean by that is, again, you're looking at another team that doesn't have their quarterback situation set by any means. And the weird thing with the Cardinals is we don't even know what direction they're going to go in with their quarterback. I mean, one day we see Kyler Murray is going to get traded. Another day we see that they're going to stick with Kyler Murray, that they're open to doing that. They also have Jacoby Brissett, who again could be a bridge option. And then again, very similar to the Jets, they have a top end pick and they can't select the quarterback because there's none viable for the pick. Now you could go edge rusher for sure, but I don't think the Cardinals defense necessarily needs that. Now, for me, I actually had them going with a tackle. I have them going with Francis Mauanoa out of Miami. Now, the thing with this pick for me is that a lot of people may argue that this guy can go a lot lower. This guy is maybe has the 8 to 12 value, but I believe this is the biggest need for them. And the other thing I do want to discuss with this pick between Francis Mauanoa and Spencer Fanu, I believe those are two guys that you were necessarily splitting hairs. Why I went with Francis over Spencer is because I think Francis, again, like with the gauntlet that Miami played towards the end of the college football playoffs, I believe he showed that this offensive line as a unit for Miami could get protection over the most ferocious defenses when you look at how they played against Ohio State and when you look at how they played against Indiana. So I believe that little bit of that stretch separated him over Spencer Fanu. And then again, Spencer Fanu was injured later the year as well. I think both guys you could definitely split hairs. And then again, my biggest thing, if you're going to take an offensive lineman with a top 5, top 10 pick, and again, you know this from last year, let it be a tackle. A tackle is going to be a way more influential position on that offensive line than a guard. So again, him playing a tackle position, I also think is pretty good as well. You could go again, like I said, if you want to go with an edge to change around that defense, but I kind of believe their defense is sufficient at the edge positions. And then again, when you look at their offense too, like they're in a weird spot because they got two receivers, two young receivers that still have belief in them. Obviously, Michael Wilson had more production again this year. And then you look at Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think anybody has also gave up on him by any means. We talked about a couple of years ago how this guy was again this top end wide receiver elite prospect. So they do have two really good pass catchers. Then you also had Trey McBride, one of the best pass catchers in the league at the tight end position. Um, and then again, we're going to talk about Jeremiah Love the whole entire draft until we get to his pick. This is a guy that has the argument to be the best player in the draft. We know they have this need at running back, but again, I don't think they're ready to contend yet. And we had this argument last year with Ashton Genty. If you're not ready to contend, why take a running back? Because we know they top end like kind of in their first couple of years. So, like again, Cardinals could go a variety of different ways, and they're in this very weird spot because we don't even know what the quarterback situation is going to be. I have them going offensive line, Francis Mauno at the rate.
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with that. I don't think they should go running back. That would be a huge mistake for them. I think we, like you talked about it, we'll get a clearer picture depending on what they do with Kyler Murray this offseason, what they could do at quarterback. Honestly, I don't even think Jacoby Brissett would be a bad option for them to go into next season with, and then maybe you try to draft a young guy to sit behind him. I feel like that could work. I mean, he was. I don't think he was that bad. I mean, the Cardinals really didn't win a lot of games, obviously, but I didn't think he was that bad stepping in for Kyler Murray when Kyler Murray was injured. I don't have a problem with offensive line. They did kind of address the defensive line last offseason. I know they brought over Sweat from the Eagles, as an edge rusher. So yeah, I mean they could go a variety of different ways, whether it is with the offensive line, whether it is on the defensive side of the ball. Again, quarterback class not that strong, so depending on what they do with Kyler Murray, like I said, maybe they take someone later in the draft. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so again, as you're getting into these top end picks, you're looking at teams that could go a lot of different ways because again, they just have so many different needs. Then when we get to the later picks, obviously we could break it down into really team needs, and these teams are flexible because they again have way more positions established. When we're looking at the Tennessee Titans now, they also fall into that category that they have a bunch of needs. They obviously select Cam Ward last year at the first overall pick. So to have their quarterback for now, again, he hasn't shown yet that he's going to be their franchise quarterback, but they're definitely going to ride with him for the next year and a half, 2 years. So they're not in the position that the other teams are in where they need their quarterback. They have the guy there that's going to be there at least for the immediate short term. So again, there are a lot of different ways you could go with this pick. You could look at this pick and say, hey, do I want to give Cam Ward something to develop on the offensive end? The way I kind of look at it is I like, again, the edge rushers because they could, again, take hold of a whole entire defense. And really, the way I look at it is Robert Saleh got hired as the head coach there. His teams have an identity on defense. And I think he's going to want, again, the best defensive prospect that makes this defense an elite unit. I'm going with Dave and Bailey out of Texas Tech. Again, I believe he's way more of the safer option when you look at edge rushers in this draft. I believe he's kind of that plug and play edge rusher who's going to know his role right away, rush the passer. And like I said, you could go a variety of different ways. You could give Cam Ward something to work with, as again, he is that young quarterback and you want to see him develop. But I look at it as Robert Saleh's team have identity. They're going to be defensive teams regardless. He's going to try to mold them into that. And he's going to take again, the top prospect at this pick and the best thing to shore up this defense in David Bailey.
Yeah, I don't dislike the pick. And with Saleh now as a head coach, it does make sense there. I think they could also be another team that maybe you address the offensive line with that pick as well, because the offensive line wasn't very good. I mean, Cam Ward just did not have a lot around him last year. And I are they one of the teams that has a lot of cap space this offseason? I'd have to look. I feel like
I,
they might have.
I think they have a decent amount of cap space.
So maybe, they go and they get, some veteran receivers as well if they want to do. I mean, I know they have Calvin Ridley, but we talked about Calvin Ridley yesterday on one of our shows, and obviously his prime is behind him. So maybe they look to add somebody via free agency. Um I don't dislike it. I think you either, address the offensive line, or you could address the defensive line, with this selection. But the Titans are one of those teams where they need a lot. Um, I feel like Cam Ward got better as the year went along. Um, still very young, obviously going into his second year. So, and now you got Brian Dable as the offensive coordinator. So we'll see if that pays off. But yeah, with Salah, obviously, you want to build up your defense. So yeah, I don't really, I don't have a problem with this selection.
Yeah, and then again, like Cam Ward, very tough player to evaluate because again, you almost feel like he had no chance with how early the coach got fired and the talent he has around him and stuff like that. So it's going to be very interesting to see. And I do like the coaching hires um, with Salah, with Dayball, and then like you mentioned, yeah, like again, they could go offensive line, they could go edge, they could go receiver. I mean, again, this is a team that was really bad this year. They have a lot of needs, and there's a lot of different ways they could go. I just think again, they kind of if you go David Bailey, you kind of go again with a need that you have and impact need at the edge. But again, this is a pick that they could go a variety of different ways. Now I kind of feel like at 5, you're going into teams now that some teams at least that again have a little bit more positions figured out. When you look at the New York Giants, obviously they have their quarterback in Jackson Dart, a guy that I hammered for last year. They traded in back end of the first to get Jackson Dart. They do have a really good front seven as well, I believe. They do have some pieces on the offense now. Again, going into pieces on the offense, I do believe this pick is going to come down to two players that both play for Ohio State. It's going to be Caleb Downs or Carnell Tate. I believe those are the two players that are rumored at this pick. It's going to be whether do you want to pair somebody with Malik Neighbors or do you want to shore up that secondary. Now, with the pick I am going with, I'm personally going with Caleb Downs. I've expressed to you, I believe he is the best player in this draft. Again, for me, it's either between him or Jeremiah Love. The only argument with the Caleb Downs pick is that you're looking at a safety as kind of a luxury pick. How I kind of look at Caleb Downs, he's a Swiss Army knife. I believe he could be a leader on this defense. And I believe a safety position, depending on how great that safety develops, can be a position of value. I think you're getting a guaranteed good player. The other aspect I also want you to look at is when you look at who they brought in as head coach, who do they bring in? They bring in John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh has prioritized the safety position now for years. When you look at John Harbaugh early in Baltimore, he had Ed Reed. When you look at him later, he has Kyle Hamilton, you could argue is the best safety in the league as well. So this is a guy that definitely prioritizes that position. And again, for a secondary that does need help, I believe this guy could definitely shore up the secondary. I wouldn't mind Carnell Tate at all. We are both very high on Carnell Tate. But I do think when you have a Malik Neighbors and if they sign back Wan'Dale Robinson, that's also going to be something that maybe could tell us a little more about this pick later. But I think those are two. Again, Malik Neighbors has top receiver in the league upside. And then also Wan'Dale Robinson, I think, is a very good secondary receiver. Maybe they do need to bring something else in that room, but I think they could do that later. I don't think there is a safety secondary player to the level of Caleb Downs. And then we also always see receivers, whether it's via free agency, whether they just bring in another secondary piece, or if they go in the second round, possibly third round. Like we see receivers still come out and be top receivers in the league in those rounds. So I go Caleb Downs here again. I do think it's going to be the battle of the two Ohio State guys who get selected. I really don't even see another player possible at this fifth pick. I kind of think it's those two guys.
Yeah, my only pushback with the pick is that, after the Giants let go of Xavier McKinney, they drafted Tyler Nubin, and then they also brought in Javon Holland last offseason. Joe Shane paid him a lot of money. So those two safety positions with those two players, that's my only pushback with that. Um, with receiver, I feel like, I mean, the Giants secondary obviously needs work. Don't get me wrong. If they can, bring in another corner, or two, that would definitely help. The receiver depth, though, behind Neighbors and, depending on what happens with Wan'Dale Robinson, is kind of thin. So receiver, I would lean towards that right now. But I also could see another scenario which the Giants could be a team that could trade down potentially as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on their pick. Defensive line, I think they're fine, obviously. Um, I would never say no to an offensive lineman, but I don't think they're going to make that kind of pick there. And obviously, for the moment, they are set at quarterback. So um, that's kind of where I'm at with this pick. I feel like they could use another playmaker on this offense, but secondary is something that they are going to prioritize one way or another, whether it is through the draft or free agency.
Yeah, so again, as we said, it's going to be a battle of who really goes from Ohio State within that fifth pick. But at number six, we have the guy that we are also debating that pick with. We have Cardinal Tate going to the Cleveland Browns. Now, again, very similar to the Giants. I do feel like the Cleveland Browns do have some positions shored up. I believe their whole defense is pretty much shored up. It's one of the best defensive units in the NFL. We look at them having defensive rookie of the year caliber guy there. You have Myles Garrett, who you could argue is the best defensive player in the entirety of football. They drafted Mason Graham last year, so again, I think that defense is shored up. My only debate with this pick, it was just whether they were going to go receiver or were they going to go in the realms of a tackle, an offensive lineman. I do think again, the offensive line isn't horrible, but it definitely could use another piece. I went Cardinal Tate because I don't think Cardinal Tate is just going to go lower than six. And I do believe we've said this with the Browns. They could use another offensive weapon for sure. They have Quinshon Judkins, but the way that it ended this year, who knows how he's going to come back. And then they have Jerry Jeudy, who they did pay, who I still like Jerry Jeudy. I don't know if he's ever going to be a wide receiver one in the NFL, but as a second receiver, I kind of love him as a second receiver. I think they could definitely use a Cardinal Tate, a guy that could be a wide receiver one on their offense for years to come. The only odd thing with this pick as well is I don't even think the Browns are high on any quarterback in their room. We expect it to be Shador Sanders, but who knows? Could give Deshaun Watson a shot, could give Dylan Gabriel a shot, could make again, maybe draft another quarterback later in this draft. Who knows? But again, for a team that doesn't have their quarterback situation figured out to give them a weapon is a little weird. But I do think at worst, again, depending on what happens with the Myles Garrett stuff, if he's on this team again another year from now, if you add in this offensive piece in Cardinal Tate, and then you also have this defense shored up, we're looking at the year after next. You either have best case scenario, Shador Sanders pans out, or you have a team again that needs a quarterback that isn't that bad of a destination anymore because they do have a lot of their holes. And again, possibly if they draft Cardinal Tate and maybe add something on the offensive line, be a free agency, or again with a later pick, this is a team that maybe could ride with their defense and isn't even that bad of a scenario for a Shador Sanders or Deshaun Watson and can maybe win on the backs of their defense and have enough on offense again to maybe take them somewhere. I don't think the Browns again are as far off as the sixth pick may lead them. Very similar to the Giants at five. I believe these are two teams that aren't that far off as contention as maybe a fifth, sixth pick normally is. But again, to sum it up, I do have them going Cardinal Tate.
Yeah, I mean, like the Jets, they're one of those teams that, I mean, we'll see, with what they end up deciding to do with quarterback next season, if it's Shador Sanders from the beginning. But yeah, like they aren't that far off. If they can figure out their quarterback situation, like they can be a decent team because they, like you said, the defense is still well put together. You got the defensive player of the year over there with Myles Garrett. Um, Unlike the Jets, they're kind of that team that needs to go all in on offense. And, whether it's shoring up that offensive line, adding another weapon, whether it's Shador Sanders, whether it's Dylan Gabriel, or whether it is Deshaun Watson, who ends up starting for them next season, they got that's the area that they have to address, especially with their first pick. And obviously they have Jacksonville's pick later in the first round, so they could double up on offense. Um, so yeah, I mean, they are one of those teams, like, and they made the playoffs a couple years ago with Joe Flacco at quarterback, starting those final 5 games. So, like, there's some good pieces on this team. And they got some young offensive weapons now. Quinshon Judkins obviously, got hurt last season, late in the year, so hopefully he can bounce back from that. But did pretty well in his rookie season. Fan in the tight end, it was pretty good for them. But yeah, they still need another pass catcher or two in this offense.
Yep. So that now leads us to the seventh overall pick with the Washington Commanders. Again, another team that I believe could go a variety of different ways. I believe this team possibly has the worst running back room in all of
It's
football,
definitely up there.
pretty much. And again, Jeremiah Love is one of the best players in this class. But for some reason, when I was making this mock, I do not see them going running back here. And again, I don't know if Jeremiah Love, if a team's going to bite or if, he's going to go as low as we have him going. But I actually went with Ruben Bain here. Again, I kind of think the Commanders are a lot farther off than people think. Again, that really depends on what you think of Jaden Daniels. And Jaden Daniels, I think, again, has the most wide range of opinion out of possibly any quarterback in the NFL right now. Because, again, the way his career went the last 2 years has been very weird. When you look at Jaden Daniels, the first year, he arguably had the best rookie season in the history of the National Football League. Then when you look at the second year, he didn't play well to begin with. Then he got injured. So now this is a wash. So it really depends on how high do you think Jaden Daniels is as a quarterback in this league. But I also think this Washington team has a lot of holes. Like I said, it could be Jeremiah Love. I also think that a lot of people that are making mock drafts also believe it can be a receiver. Obviously, their receivers are on the older side. But again, I think this Washington team does have a lot of needs. And I don't think the receiver position is at the top of it, even though, again, you could argue Terry McLaurin and Debo are on the older side. I don't think they take a receiver this high. In my opinion, like I said, I do think it really comes down to Ruben Bain or Jeremiah Love. Ruben Bain is a guy that, again, was arguably the best player in the national championship. When you look at, again, this guy has an edge. Another guy that I believe is a plug and play edge, and a guy that could change around the whole entire defensive unit. And again, I do think, like, even though Washington was in the NFC Championship not that long ago, I do think this team is farther off than people think. I believe you get the edge that really sets up this defensive unit and makes this defensive unit, something to be reckoned with. Even though, again, I think Jeremiah Love is definitely viable as well. I guess my only knock was I think the Commanders are a little bit farther off from contention than other people do. Maybe if you think that the Commanders, again, could be a legit playoff team next year, then you go with Jeremiah Love. But again, I think this pick really depends on how you personally view the Commanders and Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think you do go either defense or offensive line. The defense also, I mean, the previous year when they went to the championship game, I mean, they got shredded by Philadelphia. In the running game, I wouldn't say the defense was completely shut down, and then obviously last year was not great at all. So I think that's definitely a unit that needs some upgrades there. So I think I would probably lean towards more so them taking a defensive player here. Obviously the pass catchers, like you said, are on the older side. The running back room is not great. And you got a quarterback that, even though he played very well his rookie season, he also missed some time with injury. So on top of last year missing a lot of games with injuries, even the year before that when they went to the NFC Championship game, he was injured. So durability is a bit of a problem for Jane Daniels in his um, his early NFL career so far. But yeah, I would say defense is what they got to do with this first pick. Go that way. I don't have a problem with that selection at 7 there for them with their first pick.
All right. Now going into number 8, I um I have Jordan Tyson going at number 8. Now, we talked about Jordan Tyson a lot yesterday as we did a receiver episode going over the top receivers of the draft. And I said that I like Mekhi Lemon a little more than Jordan Tyson, but I do believe Jordan Tyson is going to go in front of Mekhi Lemon just because of having that prototypical NFL size. The biggest thing with Jordan Tyson, he could have been the first receiver taken in this draft. And again, who knows what's going to happen? He still can be. But the biggest thing with him is durability. Is he going to be able to stay on the field? We discussed last we discussed yesterday 2022, 2024, 2025, all these seasons he has dealt with injury. But it's a guy, like I said, with more burst possibly than almost anybody in this entire draft. He has the size, he has the ability to play every receiver position on the field. And the biggest reason why I like him to the Saints, I like him pairing up not only with Chris Olave on the other side, who, again, Chris Olave, a couple of years back, we didn't even know how long this guy's NFL career is going to be. Now he seems motivated to help in Tyler Shuck. He said that in multiple interviews. And Tyler Shuck is a guy that I didn't really like coming out of the draft. but he's a guy that surprised me and I think surprised everybody around the league. He ended up being really good, having a really good rookie season when he did come in. So I think you saw something from him. And then the biggest thing to me too, if you get Tyler Shuck and his offense to develop even further, the division they're in is like absolutely wide open in my opinion. I think it's a horrible division. A lot of people thought it was going to be the Bucks division. Bucks dealt with injuries. Bucks are also older. And then again, Carolina Panthers, we all know they really weren't a playoff team. Again, I do believe they have hope as well, but again, not like a juggernaut you're really worried about. And then the Falcons, I do believe, have two great units on both sides of the ball, but just can't figure out the quarterback. So again, they have that question mark with them. So I think again, you could argue that Tyler Shuck is going to be their franchise quarterback, and why not pair him up with a great weapon like Jordan Tyson and have two dynamic weapons that could really play all over the field. And again, I don't know if I discussed this already with this pick. A lot of people were thinking running back Jeremiah Love, which I actually do not mind him going to the Saints because, again, I believe the Saints could be a team that could be a playoff team as close to next year. Like I said, with the quarterback that they have and with what open division, how they ended off the season, like it is possible. But again, I think again with them having Kamara and other people in that room, I just see Jordan Tyson as a better fit.
Yeah, I mean, if they were to go running back, I mean, Kamara is obviously on the older side, but back in the day, I felt like it definitely worked a lot better in the Saints' favor when you had Kamara being that, pass catching running back with, more of a traditional running back. When they had Mark Ingram there, they had Latavius Murray there. Like I felt like that worked well when you had him working alongside another running back. But obviously that was back when the Saints were competing in the NFC, being one of the top teams in the NFC, and trying to go to another Super Bowl with Drew Brees. Now it's a little bit different. Kamara's older, and this team is not the same like it was back in those seasons. But yeah, no, Tyler Shuck definitely I think surprised all of us with how he played. The Saints looked like they were going to finish with one of the worst records in the NFL, and they finished with more of a respectable record. They definitely played a lot better down the stretch last season. Kellen Moore, not a bad first season, all things considered. And it seems like maybe they might have found something with Tyler Shuck. So adding another pass catcher, that's not a bad way to go. I know they got some older defensive players, and they traded away guys, Marshawn Lattimore, last season, trading him to Washington. So defense could be another possibility for them. Yeah, I mean, adding another receiver opposite Olave, I think could work as well. Olave, I thought played really well last season, all things considered. I mean, again, he was contemplating retirement with all the concussion issues, and then put together a good season. So I don't have a problem with that pick.
All right, now at number 9, we could stop talking about him, or we could talk about him right now and then stop talking about him. We have Jeremiah Love going to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, for the Chiefs, I think this pick could really determine the Chiefs' future and how quick they turn things around because I believe if they're able to get Jeremiah Love at number 9, this could be one player completely, again, get the Chiefs out of again missing the playoffs to making it yet again obviously, and with Patrick Mahomes being the best quarterback in the league, in our opinion, they believe they have a chance to make the playoffs every single year. Obviously, this year didn't go as planned, but for a guy like Jeremiah Love, this guy is so versatile, and he is a guy that I think could not only be a running back that could go 80 yards, he's also a guy that you could line up at receiver and is like the perfect modern day running back. And he's a guy that I believe that's going to explode off the scene very much like an Ezekiel Elliott or a Todd Gurley very early in his career. So this could be the one guy for the Chiefs. Not only do the Chiefs need something in this offense, this could be a guy that could be one of the best players at his position in the first year in the NFL. And that's exactly what a team that wants to contend like the Kansas City Chiefs need. And then again, like I said, with the Chiefs having a passing attack that's Patrick Mahomes at the helm, to have a guy that could be an elite pass catching running back in the NFL like Jeremiah Love gives Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid the capability to use this guy in a variety of different ways. I think he can completely change this offense. And I think this is like the perfect pairing, like I said, because you have a guy like in the running back position that's gonna have his best years early in his career, and he's going to a team that could contend early in his career. I absolutely love the fit. Now, again, What's going to be weird with the Chiefs is a lot of people have the expectation that possibly maybe Bruce Hall could go there via free agency, or they could do something like that. So what the Chiefs are going to do via free agency could definitely change this pick. And then again, like for the Chiefs, you're sitting there at 9, waiting, hoping that a top guy in this class falls to 9. I'm not sure that's going to happen. We discussed again 3, 4 other teams before this that could possibly go Jeremiah Love and see him being again that guy that could put you right into contention because he's going to be a great player right away. So again, Chiefs in kind of a weird spot, and I believe this pick could really determine their future because who would have ever thought going into last year that the Chiefs could have a top 10 pick? And again, obviously, they aren't a team that people look at as one of the 9 worst teams in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about it yesterday. I feel like the Chiefs can bounce back and be a playoff caliber team again next season. Um, it was kind of like the reverse from the previous year where they won all these one score games. It was the exact opposite where they lost a lot of one score games. I feel like they didn't bounce back as well as they did after the Tampa Bay Super Bowl where they knew what their weakness was, offensive line, and they were able to correct that. And then sure enough, they're back in the AFC Championship game and then they win back-to-back Super Bowls. Um, so I do think that's something that they are going to try to address this offseason. But I feel like one thing during this entire run with Patrick Mahomes is they've never really had like an elite running game. So if they can go and get the best running back in this draft, I feel like that would definitely get themselves back into the conversation of being a team to watch out for in the AFC. And we also talked about how the AFC really isn't that big of a powerhouse. So I think it's one of those things where they go and they address the offensive line. They could, address it in the draft, but I feel like they could take Love here, address the line in this draft, get some guys to help out the line in free agency, and with Mahomes being healthy next year, this team could be back to being, a competitive playoff team. And with an added running game along with Patrick Mahomes, that just makes them even more dangerous.
Now, the other thing before we just cap off Jeremiah Love in general for this episode, the biggest thing with Jeremiah Love, too, not only is he this elite talent at running back, this isn't a deep running back class at all. If Jeremiah Love gets selected within the top 10, there may not be another running back that goes in the top 50 picks. Whether you look at Jadarian Price, who might be the second best running back in this class, who played at Notre Dame with Jeremiah Love, or if you want to look at Jonah Coleman, or if you want to look at Emmett Johnson, you're looking at guys that are going to be probably selected round 3 and above. So the running back class isn't deep, so it may cause a team to maybe go earlier than expected for Jeremiah Love because there isn't that option later in the draft, which I think is interesting. Now we get into number 10. Obviously, everybody knows where we're going to lean with number 10. We're going to go obviously on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like this is the second, third year straight we have been saying this with Cincinnati. But again, obviously their offense is prolific when Joe Burrow's healthy and they have everything in sorts. And I actually think their offensive line was not as bad as in years past. I think their offensive line was pretty solid. Maybe they could use an offensive lineman, but I don't think that's where they're going to go here. They went Jamar Stewart last year, who again hasn't really produced as they expected. I have them going Sonny Styles this year at number 10. Again, a linebacker that's also pretty versatile as well, could help your defense. And I think the biggest thing too, why they have to go defense is who knows if Trey Henderson is going to be back for this team. So again, you're looking at the best defensive player on your unit possibly not being there. So you got to go defensive player, but not only that, a defensive player at a position with impact. I think Sonny Styles is just the best available prospect at 10 with the draft that we have and the players that went in front of him. So I think they go Sonny Styles here. And again, like I said, a lot of people think Cincinnati, when they're all healthy, could definitely be a team to contend with because of the quarterback that they do have. But there's no doubt that they need to shore up this defense if that quarterback is going to stay there. I have them going Sonny Styles at 10, like a pretty obvious pick with the position and the team needs.
Yeah, so they are, basically one of those teams last couple years now. Yeah, they got to go all in on the defensive side of the ball. That's, along with Joe Burrow getting hurt the last couple of years, um, the defensive side of the ball has been a major weakness of the team. And if they can get it back to how it was the first time, similar to how it was the first time Burrow and the Bengals went on that run. This team could be back in the playoffs again, and they could be a dangerous team. So I don't have a problem with that pick. And it is going to be tough now with Trey Hendrickson probably on his way out because now you're going to have to replace him, which weakens the defense even more so. And they didn't really have him last year either. Like I don't even how many games did he even play last year? Right? Was any? I'd have to go back and look, um, but yeah, defense is obviously where they have to go to get themselves back to being a playoff team, and obviously the health of their quarterback is very important as well. They got to make sure Burrow's healthy too.
Okay, so we slide in now to number 11 pick in the draft, the Miami Dolphins. The one thing I do want to discuss about this draft that I forgot to hit on, I do believe pick 7 to 11 is kind of the sweet spot in this draft. I believe those are picks where you're getting elite talent, guys that could possibly be in the top 3, top 4, top 5, but they're sliding down from 7 to 11. And I believe this is the last pick where you see kind of a talent break from 11 to 12. So the Miami Dolphins have this pick if they go with the correct player. I believe that's a talent break. Now, the Miami Dolphins, I think, is honestly, again, one of the worst position teams in this NFL draft. They have pick 11. I think a lot of people probably think they're worse than pick 11, just based on what they have going into next year. They don't have their quarterback situation figured out. They're going to move off Tua. We don't know how that's going to be with his contract. It's going to be hard to move off him, but again, we don't expect him to start next year. They obviously can't go quarterback. They don't have a top pick. There were really 2, 3 places I could see his team going. Obviously, they do have some needs. I was thinking wide receiver, but I don't like the fit of Makai Lemon because I do think again Makai Lemon's a great receiver who I think is going to go way lower than expected in this draft, even though I think he's one of the best players in this draft. I just think him with Jaden Waddle, you're pairing two small type receivers. Like, it could definitely work, but I don't see it. I also talked about, again, at number 3, I believe it was, again, splitting hairs between Francis and Spencer Fanu. So I do see them going Spencer Fanu here at 11. Again, they could use work on this offensive line. You don't know who's going to be the quarterback for you again, and he's going to need help on the offensive line because he's probably not going to be a very good quarterback. But like I said, the Dolphins, like they're not a team like the Jets who are loaded with picks, and I believe they don't have their quarterback. They don't have a top end pick in this draft. Like I said, probably the worst position team in this draft. Like again, when you look at the Chiefs, Bengals, again, even Browns, Giants, like a lot of teams that we think higher of going into next season than the Dolphins, for them to have the 11th pick, I believe is kind of tough. Yeah, like I said, I've been going Spencer Fano. I do think this is like kind of a steal in value because again, this is a guy that's a top 5 prospect. Like I said, that's going all the way down to 11, and it definitely fits their needs.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens with the Dolphins next year. Cutting ties with Tua. Are they going to go forward with Quinn Ewers at quarterback? Um, I guess, yeah, I mean, going offensive line, not a bad way to go. I mean, we'll see what happens with Tyreek Hill. What's the deal with him? Is he going to be back with the team? He's going to be elsewhere. He's going to retire after the injury that he suffered. Um, you know, defense also not the best unit, so they could go that way as well. So yeah, don't really have a problem with this pick. Especially if they're going with the young quarterback next year.
Yeah, and like we said, like you just mentioned, like it could go a lot of different ways, and like the teams in front of them don't nearly have as many holes as this team does. So very interesting too. Again, like I believe they're one of the worst position spots in the league. Now again, like we said, there was a break of talent from again the top 11 picks now to 12. I do think it's where you see a talent gap, talent tier break, whatever you want to say. Like again, Makai Lemon is still on the board. I believe is an elite talent, but everybody else, again, I think it's kind of like a tier break in talent. Um, Dallas Cowboys, again, they obviously do need defense. We saw their defense get a little better with mid-season trades that they make. They definitely don't need a receiver, obviously, to have one of the best in the league. And they have George Pickens, one of the best in the league. Assuming that they retain him, their offense is pretty their quarterback. Again, they just really need to stack up on defense. I do expect both of their picks in the first round to be defensive players. I do think they're selecting this player a little early, but it kind of just fits their need. I'm going with Cassius Howell here again, a guy that really just plays primarily on the edge, a guy that can help them out in a position of need. Like I said, I do think their defense is not going to be as bad start to finish, and they are a team with 2 first-round selections in this draft. Obviously, again, they have 2 first-round selections in this draft, but they have none in the next draft. So again, you're kind of like giving a little to get. But I do expect them again not to spoil it, to go defense on both of these picks. And again, I have them going with edge as a position. Again, just obviously they need it, and this is again the position of value when you look at defense.
Yeah, I feel like with the Cowboys and with a lot of these teams now here in the teens, I think you're definitely going to see a run with all defensive players. Like when I look at the Rams and how their secondary struggled in the playoffs, I think that's definitely an area they're going to have to address. The Cowboys, they're like you said, the defense got better with the midseason trades. You know, they got better at stopping the run with Quinn and Williams, but definitely still needs a lot of work with rushing the passer and also, you know, in the secondary as well. You know, the Ravens were a team I felt like they struggled to get after the quarterback and you know, maybe some weaknesses in the secondary as well. The Bucks, I feel like that's a team that needs to address the defensive side of the ball. The Jets, obviously we just talked about them already with their first selection. You know, even the Lions as well. I know they've lost some pieces on the offensive line. You know, going back to last year. So yeah, I feel like this is really where you're going to see a run at defensive players with a lot of these teams here. But yeah, the Cowboys with their first 2 picks in the first round, yeah, I mean they got to go in on all defense because their offense is pretty much set. Could they take maybe another running back later? I know they're going to bring. I guess Javonte Williams is going to come back, and they got some other running backs as well. But they're pretty much set there unless they want to, you know, address the offensive line too. They could do that. But yeah, their offense is pretty set. It's really all about just getting this defense. You know, because a couple years ago it wasn't that bad when they made the playoffs and they lost to the 49ers. So, but yeah, the defense has been rough the last couple years. So that's where they really have to address their needs is on that side of the ball.
Yep. So that leads us into number 14. And again, like you said, we're going to see a run of defensive players. So we do have the Rams selecting Mansour Delane out of LSU. LSU's defense was surprisingly really good, especially in the beginning of this year. Mansour Delane, I believe, is the best cornerback in this draft. Um, like I said, this is a team that their secondary is like really really rough. We've seen it get exposed time after time last year. And this is a defensive unit as a whole that isn't really bad. It's just kind of lopsided because I do believe their front seven is very good. Also, another thing with the Rams that I believe is major, especially when you look at their defense, they were a team that didn't necessarily have the first round capital because obviously they went all in again 5 years back almost now. But they were able to build this unit based on picks that they've had later in drafts. Now I believe you got to shore up the secondary. I do think they're going to make some moves in free agency, but very different from again, like we said with other teams in this draft. I don't think their moves in free agency are necessarily going to be dependent on this pick. I think they need secondary, and that's their major need. So again, Mansour Delane being here at 13, the best cornerback in this draft, a cornerback not being selected up until this point, I believe is an absolute home run for the Rams because, like I said, you get the best player at that position. And then again, it's also really like your major need as a team. I like this for the Rams a lot. And then
Yeah,
they
I
also
mean,
have two first round picks. Sorry.
no, you're good, you're good. No, I was just gonna say, I mean, basically the same thing. Like their defense got exposed time and time again in the playoffs. And that's one of the main reasons why, you know, they lost to Seattle. They just could not get key stops when they needed to on third down. You know, even against the Bears, I mean, Caleb Williams throws up that prayer. I don't know what the defensive backs were doing on that play. That Cole Kmet was wide open in the back of the end zone. I mean, and they barely got by Carolina. You know, Carolina had some big plays in that wild card round matchup. So secondary is where they really need to address that unit. They also had some guys banged up as well, but they definitely need to add to that secondary this offseason because that is one of the reasons why they lost, along with their special teams as well.
Yeah. So yeah, special teams and then obviously their secondary is their biggest need. At number 14, again, another team that's viable to pick Makai Lemon and that I wouldn't mind it. My only gripe why I didn't have Makai Lemon going here was because, again, kind of very similar to the Dolphins. Zay Flowers, smaller receiver, Makai Lemon, smaller receiver, even though Makai Lemon and Zay Flowers play entirely different. So it could work. But I have, again, dumb hiring Jesse Minter, shoring up this defense. They could use defensive line help, especially in the middle. And I have them going Peter Woods. I think Peter Woods here is actually like a phenomenal pick and value as well, because for Peter Woods, I believe why he dropped in his draft was really just because Clemson as a whole was a dumpster fire this year when they had very high expectations. So when we look at the two Clemson guys, Peter Woods, TJ Parker in this draft, I do think they're going a little lower than expected when these guys were top 5, top 10 picks going into the year, just because of how Clemson played as a whole. But I do think those guys did really show on tape that they are elite NFL talents. Like they could be elite NFL talents one day. So again, Ravens, another team. Now we're getting into the teams that don't really have that many holes in general. You could have added a piece on the offensive line. You could obviously go Makai Lemon. They could go again offensive help for Lamar Jackson. But I think again with the defensive coach that you brought in and Peter Woods still having great value at this pick, I like Peter Woods to shore up the inside for the Ravens.
Yeah, no, I'm in lockstep. I feel like on offense, again, they could add another piece, via free agency, and in the later rounds maybe. But I feel like here, especially, with the defensive minded head coach that you're bringing in, the Ravens, they don't have, guys that can consistently get to the quarterback. So that's an area that they can go. Secondary help, maybe as well. But yeah, a defensive player, I think, is what the Ravens are going to end up doing with their first selection.
All right. Now we're speeding through. At number 15, we have Kedrick Falk going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you could have went a variety of places. Like, again, obviously, as you see on the screen, they have needs of tight end, guard, edge, linebacker, cornerback. Could have went a lot of different places. My thing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I really don't think you add another weapon on offense. Doesn't really make sense to me. I think they're pretty deep. Obviously, they probably have one of the deepest running back rooms in the entirety of the league. Because again, even when Bucky Irving was out, you saw Rashad White, Sean Tucker all play really well. So again, obviously you're deep there. Your receiver room is one of the deepest in the NFL because you have Mike Evans, you have Chris Godwin, you have Emeka Ibuka, but then you also have secondary receivers as well that also shine in moments, whether it was Tez Johnson, Sterling Shepard. Like they're pretty deep all around their offense when it comes to weapons. Don't really need any weapons at all, in my opinion. That's why I didn't have them definitely going tight end because I just think it's like unnecessary. Now, the only thing with Tampa Bay, and I'm going to talk about a little bit with the defense, again, when you look at Devin White for them in the past and other players, and it's very similar to the offense as well as we were talking about Mike Evans, Chris Godwin and stuff. They're kind of aging out at this point. Again, you're gonna have don't get me wrong, these players gonna have another good year. But again, isn't players you're looking at that's gonna really stack up another 4 or 5 good years? Again, they have a lot of players aging out, and I think they have a lot of players aging out on their defense. So for them going for an edge rusher in Kedrick Falk, obviously again we're talking about position of value on defense, and probably the most valuable position that they could possibly add on would be an edge rusher. I think that definitely helps them. And again, Tampa Bay is a team like we talked about in this division that's wide open where you add the right piece or two, you could win this division and make the playoffs. Anybody could make the playoffs in that team, whether they in that division, whether they deserve it or not. So I have them going Kedrick Fall.
Yeah, I mean, because we did watch the first round of the draft together last year. I was definitely a little surprised, although I did really like the pick, obviously, when they took Emeka Ibuka. And had a great first half of the season, kind of slowed down in the second half, but the Bucks as a team really slowed down in the second half. I feel like their defense definitely has been lacking. Obviously, not the same championship caliber defense that we saw back when they won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady against the Chiefs. So this defense definitely does need some guys that can get after the quarterback. Obviously they got some older players. Levante David obviously getting up there in age. You still got Vita Vea on the defensive line, but yeah, no, they definitely need some more youth on this defensive side of the ball. And I think if it wasn't last year, they definitely need to go with a defensive player in the first round. I mean, offensive line had some issues last year; it was a little banged up, so I could see that being an area that they address here too. But I think you got to go all in on the defense because, like you mentioned, the weapons that they have, both coming out of the backfield and the pass catchers for Baker Mayfield, they're definitely set there. Defense is the priority for them.
All right, so now we get into 16, and we have the Jets in this mock draft completely winning out on the value side. A guy that I believe is one of the best players in his entire draft, sliding all the way down to 16. Now, again, this probably won't happen. He'll probably go a lot earlier, but just the way our mock draft shaped out, this was a possibility that the Jets were able to select him at 16. Now, again, the biggest thing that's going to decide his pick as well, we talked about with the Chiefs at 9. They're going to take Jeremiah Love, we believe, if he's there. If he's not there, we could very well see them going Makai Lemon. I absolutely love Makai Lemon for the Jets. There's no other way to put it. Like again, like I said, a top 5, top 10 caliber guy going at 16, you completely win out. Again, add another weapon alongside Garrett Wilson because I had this debate with people last week. Like again, Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson, I don't think panned out to the extent that a lot of people thought that they would pan out. Again, obviously, you could talk about the multitude of quarterbacks they had to play with, that not necessarily helping them. But at the same time, I never believed this Jets team had a true wide receiver one. I think Makai Lemon could be that. You're looking at a guy that's an elite route runner, very quick, gets really good separation, plays a lot bigger than he is. And then when you look at, like we said, we talked about this yesterday with the landscape of the NFL and how it's trending, you'll get a guy very similar like Jackson Smith-Njigba that runs elite routes that isn't the quickest and isn't the biggest, possibly being the best receiver in the entire league. So again, things are changing. It's not necessarily the biggest, fastest guy as a prospect. If you run elite routes and you have the ability to get open every single play like Makai Lemon has, this is a guy that again could be one of the best receivers in the league. And then when we look at him again, obviously his last year in the NFL, I mean, his last year in college football has been arguably the most impressive out of any receiver in college football. Him winning the Biletnikoff Award, going to the best receiver. And then also when you look at him, like I said, we talked about yesterday, the constant involvement and the ability to get open and win out in the slot. I mean, you're looking at a guy 7 times out of 12 games having 7+ receptions. So this just tells you this guy is consistently getting open and consistently winning out. I absolutely love the pick for the Jets. Not sure if it's actually going to happen, but the way our mock draft shaped out, he just happened to be there.
Yeah, again, I feel like for them, like they definitely can get a playmaker here. I would still probably lean towards them taking somebody for the defense. Because of how the defense finished last year. Again, does the offense need more playmakers? Absolutely. Would this be a good pick here? Absolutely. But and also, again, depends on what they end up doing at quarterback too, which is something that we'll have to keep an eye on this offseason. But I would still probably lean towards them going with a defensive player here, and going both defensive players with their first two picks.
Yep. So again, Jets could definitely go defense. Obviously, we know they want to build an identity on that side of the ball for Aaron Glenn. That's obviously where he specializes. Um, at number 17, we do have the Lions going with Jermod McCoy. Now, again, this is definitely a team that could have went offensive line. I kind of believe it's offensive line or secondary for this team. Obviously, a team with a ton of talent. I mean, when you look at their offense is absolutely prolific, and a team that again missed out on the playoffs this year that could very well be contending next year. I think Jamar McCoy definitely like shores up things for them. Again, it isn't a draft really known for cornerbacks. Obviously, we talked about Mansour Delane going number 13 in this mock draft to the Rams. Jamar McCoy is a guy that's right up there with him. And again, I think at 17, I think it's the right pick for them. I also could definitely see Lyman as well.
Yeah, no, same with me. Offensive line, like I said, losing some guys on that side of the ball. Last year, and they tried to bring back Frank Ragnow, and then he like failed his physical. And you could tell the offensive line wasn't like it was the previous season when they won 15 games. So, and obviously with the quarterback like Jared Goff, who's not known for his mobility, more of that traditional pocket passer. You want to make sure that he has the best protection possible. And also this defense, although they have good defensive players, I feel like this is not a lockdown unit. So I definitely would like to see them go defensive player here too. Um, Either that or offensive line for them as well. I feel like those are where those are the areas they need to address.
All right, now we get to number 18, and I actually do want to talk about this team a little more than the actual pick because we talked about this yesterday on, I don't know when we talked about this actually, but we were talking about the Minnesota Vikings at some point. And I believe Minnesota Vikings are at the state right now. Like again, obviously we all know they messed up not keeping Darnold. That's 100% true. But at the same time, I do believe this team, a lot of people aren't realizing, isn't the state that it was at a couple of years ago. I do think their offensive line was horrible last year. I do think there were times where JJ McCarthy really just had no chance. And then also you look at their running game as well. They're not going to have the pick to select Jeremiah Love. Obviously, they're at 18, but their running back room is also really bad. So I do think you want to shore up the offensive line, not only if you believe in JJ McCarthy and are giving him another year, which is again up for debate because obviously they were talking about bringing in a quarterback as well, which I completely disagree with. But at the same time, we do not know what's going on in that room with JJ McCarthy. They might already think he's a bust. They might already think he has no shot, and they kind of might want to, maybe Kevin O'Connell wants to not only save his job but put his team in possible contention. Even though I don't think Kevin O'Connell necessarily is on the hot seat. But I do think their biggest need off is offensive line, just because again, the positions in their backfield that are completely unsure for them. I do think they should definitely add an offensive lineman. I do have Alavega Olane going to them, even though again they could use a tackle. I do believe again you could just move around the offensive line a little bit, and he was the best offensive line prospect available at this pick. But again, I do think again you could add stuff on the defense as well. I think this team is a lot farther away than people expect now because they were looking at the Vikings over the last couple of years making the playoffs and having these guys again. Like they don't really have a running back that they used to have. They don't really have the pass catchers that they used to have because again, you look at Jordan Addison always being in trouble, and you look at T.J. Hawkinson getting a lot older, not being the same player. Obviously, I still have Justin Jefferson there, but again, I do this team is like falsely looked at as a team that's like again being this elite team that just needs a quarterback, and I think it's much more than that for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, no, you're right with the other playmakers opposite of Justin Jefferson, and especially with the running game not being that great, Aaron Jones being an older running back, and they did bring in Jordan Mason, who I liked with the 49ers, but he wasn't really that productive for them. They did address the offensive line last offseason, but it didn't really pan out with the injuries that they suffered, guys constantly in and out. And whatever quarterback it was, behind center, struggled with the lack of protection. So, I don't really have an issue with this pick, going offensive line and, whether they're going with JJ McCarthy or and they're bringing in a veteran. Um, I think that's, not a bad pick there. The defense is pretty good. You could address uh, that side of the ball, but offensive line, I feel like would be the right selection for them here.
All right, now we get into pick 19. Kind of a weird pick. Panthers are one of those teams. Again, I don't know how you feel about the Panthers, but to me, I feel like they're pretty solid all across the board in
I think
position
for them,
group.
it could be like best player available.
It could be that. Again, he is actually the best player available on this mock, ironically. But also at the same time, like I think they're pretty solid in all position groups, but they kind of have like nothing that puts them over the top. Like they're in like this kind of weird state where,
Yeah.
like again, they don't have many elite players, but they have solid players across the board that obviously helped them make the playoffs this year. And that might not be a bad thing in this division. You may be able to consistently win this division for years to come if you just have solid position groups. Because again, this this division really nobody is an elite team in this division, which is again weird, but it's that type of division. Um, it's going to be interesting to see for the Panthers. Obviously, how Bryce Young continues to pan out. I, I'm kind of he is kind of growing on me a little bit, but again, just very inconsistent. Like he has games where he plays really well. He has games where the Panthers have no shot. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how he pans out. There was a thought in my mind that they could go receiver, but then I thought back on it. I'm like, their receiver just won Offensive Rookie of the Year, a guy we love in Tedero McMillan. They did draft a receiver earlier, not that long ago, in Xavier Legette. I'm like, they have Coker there. Like I
Yeah.
kind of don't see them going receiver here, just because again they've done that multiple times and it just hit for them last year. I have them going Caleb Banks, kind of like what you said, best player available type of notion. But then also at the same time, defensive line is kind of a need if they do have a need. That's just kind of where I leaned. I don't really have much strong opinion about this pick, like again the rest of the picks in this draft. But again, Panthers just kind of at a weird state. Like again, they're solid over across the board in position groups, but again, in my opinion, they don't really have many players that takes them over the top, which is I don't know. I don't know if you want to be in that spot of mediocrity. We'll see that.
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with that. Like I said, I guess best player available for them. Winning the division with 8 wins. They don't play in a powerhouse division. Um, they were a frustrating team, last year, and Bryce Young's been kind of a frustrating player because even going back to the year before, after he got benched, you definitely saw a better version of him, but still, like, it's still mixed in with a lot of inconsistencies, and, against some pretty good teams, showed out, I mean, particularly against the Rams, and then obviously, the Panthers went into Lambeau and they knocked off the Packers too, so they did have some impressive wins to their resume. But then also you'd have them lose to teams like, when the Saints before we were on the Tyler Shuck hype train. And you're kind of scratching your head like, how did they lose that? Always balls out against the Falcons though. He's kind of had his way with them the last couple of years. But yeah, no, for me, yeah, again, it's best player available for the Panthers. Like you said, they're solid, all around. They address the offensive line last offseason. Going to be interesting to see what happens with their running back room, their receiver. Tetsuo McMillan won Offensive Rookie of the Year. So, I mean, could they add another weapon to that receiver room? Maybe. But yeah, I don't have a problem with the selection here.
All right, now at number 20, you have the Cowboys second time in the first round. I have them going now. I know the question may be like, hey, why do you have them selecting two edges in the first round, two of the same positions? I think TJ Parker's a guy that is a debate whether he's classified as an edge or a linebacker, somebody that's diverse, somebody that, again, probably the most diverse secondary player, I mean, most diverse defensive player in this draft outside of, again, Arrow, Reese, and Caleb Downs. So, again, I do think he brings diversity to his defense, something that they do need. They do need a guy that can play multiple positions because, again, this defense is what you want to address. I believe I'm going to have no pushback from you that the Cowboys should go defensive players back to back again with these first round picks. And I also said, again, same thing with Peter Woods. I do believe Peter Woods and TJ Parker, two guys that were classified a lot higher going into the year as NFL prospects. Again, my opinion on them really hasn't changed throughout the year. I get it, Clemson was a disappointment, but I believe these guys, again, like, are top end talents in this draft. I kind of like absolutely love this pick for the Cowboys. Even though I did have them going Cassius Howell a little early at 12, I kind of think they get the value back with TJ Parker at 20. Again, a versatile player that I think they need. Again, this guy isn't going to be Micah Parsons, but you got to find ways to shore up this defense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with taking both defensive players. I mean, maybe not necessarily taking two edge rushers. Maybe you take a linebacker and an edge rusher, or a linebacker, and a safety, maybe something like that, or an edge rusher and a safety, maybe adding someone to the secondary as well. I could see that. But yeah, like we said it already, this team needs to go all in on their defense. So two defensive players, that's what they should be prioritizing in the first round.
All right, now we get into pick 21. Another team that I believe, again, where they're picking doesn't really determine, again, like, I kind of think they're picking in a bad spot. I think this team is like a little far away, obviously, when you talk about teams. Like, again, they're picking with teams now that are like possible Super Bowl contenders next year, and they're just not that. But I have the Steelers going with Caden Proctor. Again, Steelers are a team that you could go a couple of different ways. I was thinking secondary. I don't think the receiver that's on the board necessarily matches the play style alongside DK Metcalf. Um, Obviously, they need a quarterback, but you can't really go there. I mean, Aaron Rodgers may come back. Who knows? But I have them going Caden Proctor again. I don't think the offensive line is like a horrible unit for them, but I also think, again, they could add to it. Caden Proctor, a tackle at the pick, isn't a bad option. My only gripe with the pick, obviously, when we were talking about Francis and Spencer Fanu, um, I think there's a little bit of a drop off in tackles after those two players. You may be taking a little more risk if this tackle pans out, but I think, again, is a position of need for them. I wouldn't really go anywhere in the front seven for them. I do think you could go secondary for them, and then also you could add another offensive weapon. But it's weird because we don't even know who their quarterback is going to be. Um, Pittsburgh Steelers are in a weird spot, and they aren't picking at a place that's really generous for them. Like I said, they're picking like right in front of like what could possibly be Super Bowl contenders. So again, they're in a bad spot like the Miami Dolphins, in my opinion, where they're kind of picking in the slot where, again, isn't really generous for them. I have them going Keaton Proctor.
Yeah, they're not really in the best spot. I mean, they are an older team, and they could be running it back with now Aaron Rodgers being another year older, gonna be 43 this upcoming season. I think signs are pointing to him coming back. They definitely are going to have to get more pass catchers because the receiver room was not great last year. They do have a pretty young offensive line that I feel like can continue to grow. So I would probably maybe lean towards them either taking a playmaker or addressing the secondary. I mean, again, your defense is getting pretty older with Cam Hayward and TJ Watt on that side of the ball. You do have some youth there as well. But I do think the secondary does need some work. So I could definitely see them taking somebody, um, to address that area as the secondary. Um, Offensive line, yeah, they could address it. But I would lean towards secondary or a playmaker.
And then also too, like I forgot to mention, like again, now we get into like Ty Simpson range, 16 to 32, and we didn't discuss it for 16. I forgot to mention it. Somebody that the Jets could go with at 16 at the quarterback. And I said I think he's the best quarterback in the draft, which is an extremely hot take. But then also at 21 for the Steelers, like again, if we're by this point and we think and we know that Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back, if that were to be the case, this is definitely a spot where they could go Ty Simpson. I don't think it would be again too rich of a draft position to take him. You're looking at that 20 to 30 range, which isn't really that bad. It's just whether he creeps into the first round or goes in the second. But I think that would be a fine spot to take him. But for right now, as we think Aaron Rodgers coming back could be a possibility, I did have him going Keenan Proctor. Um, at number 22, I think this is where it starts getting fun when you start looking at Chargers, Eagles, you look at Bears, Bills. This is where you start looking at teams that are like could be true contenders next year and don't really have too many needs. Now, for the Chargers, I do think they're in a great position, obviously, with the NFL. Obviously, I am a little biased, but they're a team that made the playoffs last year that has a franchise quarterback that has the most cap space in the NFL. They have over $100 million in cap space. It's absolutely ridiculous. And again, their biggest need is obviously offensive line, but I think they're just shoring that up by getting healthy. When you look at again, they have two all-pro tackles that didn't play last year. That's why that was a huge glaring hole for them. But they're coming back. I do think they do need to add another piece to this offensive line, but I don't have them going offensive line here because I do think again with them having the most cap space and them having that Harbaugh connection, I do really think the Chargers are going to be the top suitor for Tyler Lindenbaum. Obviously, I do think the Giants are obviously in the market for him as well with that Harbaugh connection. But I do think that's what the Chargers are going to do because they do have the most cap space. Now I'm kind of thinking like, hey, the Chargers could do something pretty fun. I do think their offense again, they kind of did something fun last year with Omarion Hampton. But Omarion Hampton, I do kind of want to see how he pans out because again, it wasn't just the ideal year for him. Obviously, his offensive line was arguably the worst in the league, so it was hard for him to run behind. And then also at the same time, he was injured last year. So I do have him going something fun again. I don't want them going receiver because I do think again they went Ryan McConkey, they went Quinton Johnson in recent years. So I don't have him going receiver, but I do have him going pass catcher. I like Kenyon Sadiq. Now, again, a lot of people may be questioning because of Gadsden. Obviously, he had that hot start. I'm not really a believer in Gadsden. Again, maybe it could be a complementary piece to this offense. But I do think Kenyon Sadiq, now you're looking at a guy that could be like a true elite tight end prospect. When you look at him playing for Oregon, there were times last year where he had to really run protect. So he could be an extension of this offensive line blocking. Then when you look at his physical capability and when you look at him on the field, like he's an absolute monster. He's shredded. I do believe he's way too big for secondary players to guard him. And I think, again, he's too fast for linebackers to guard him. I think this is a perfect, fun pick for the Chargers. And I do think the Chargers are at the state, which is the biggest thing for these type of picks, where they have the luxury to make a pick like this. I think Kenyon Sadiq is a great option for them. Again, I do think they're going to address the pass catching to some extent because again, even though they do have the secondary receivers in Quinton Johnson, who I really do believe in, he just has to be more consistent. And they also have a Ladd McConkey as well as a pass catcher. That I don't think is ever necessarily going to be like a top end wide receiver one, just because of his limitations, obviously with size and stuff. And his ability to eat in the slot is phenomenal, but I don't know how he ever is going to transition to the outside. I think again, add another pass catcher again, pairing him up with your franchise quarterback and Justin Herbert, I think is just like the pick that the Chargers can make here.
Yeah, I like the Oregon connection too. Him being going to the same college as Herbert as well. Yeah, I mean Gadsden had like that, 2 to 3 game stretch where he was pretty good, but then kind of fell off, had some, drops in games. And yeah, I mean, I like it, and they're in a great spot. You got Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater both coming back. Maybe you still, address the interior of the offensive line. You mentioned that if they get Lindenbaum, the center, over from the Ravens, either him or the Giants, I would love that for the Giants too, for Dart. Um, so they could do that. I could still see them, addressing it in this draft as well. Getting more depth because that offensive line just got ravaged with injuries this past season. That had a lot to do with their playoff performance against the Patriots too. So, and obviously Justin Herbert took way too many hits, and you don't want that happening with your franchise quarterback. So, I do like that. Add another pass catcher for Herbert. But they got a lot of flexibility with the cap space, like you mentioned that they have.
So now we get into pick 23. And at pick 23, again, Eagles kind of another team, not that many needs. I guess you could go an edge rusher or a guard. I don't really, again, they're not really going to go tight end. Obviously, if Kenyon Sadiq just got picked right in front of them, maybe they're a team that could make that move possibly. We could look at that again, depending on what each team does in the offseason. But I have them going with Avion Terrell. Um, Brother of AJ Terrell, going to them. Again, Eagles are a team with not a lot of needs, but I feel like they also hit like this kind of like plateau this season. They were a team that we thought was going to be again a front end line for a Super Bowl contender, and I feel like they never really hit their stride all throughout the year. Again, it's kind of ironic with how good their record was, and they were obviously a division winner. But again, I feel like they kind of hit this plateau. It's going to be very interesting what they do. You talked about it in our last podcast. They could definitely go receiver if again AJ Brown does get traded, but that's going to be something that we're going to need clarity to after free agency, and that's going to come with our second mock draft. We will know definitely more about their team needs if they have that team need at receiver. But Avion Terrell, again, I do feel like these Clemson players are getting undervalued in this draft. Obviously, has a great pedigree in the family, and I do think they could use work in the secondary. I think it's a solid.
Yeah, I mean, also offensive line could potentially be an area they address because it's possible that you could see maybe two of their cornerstones on the line retire. I know I saw an article that, but possibly Landon Dickerson and Lane Johnson might retire, which would be two huge losses. And obviously, losing Jason Kelsey to a couple years before that to retirement, even though I mean they did win the Super Bowl last year, but still, that offensive line that's kind of been one of their areas where they've been a solid unit. They could be losing two more key pieces, so maybe that's something that they could do. I know we mentioned it yesterday, and you just mentioned it now. Potentially, if AJ Brown departs, going with another playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. So yeah, I could see maybe either offensive line or secondary. I don't mind that. Maybe adding another edge rusher to the fold as well. They could do that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting what kind of offseason and how it shapes out for the Eagles.
Now we get into pick 24. Now, we said with the if you go all the way back, obviously to the beginning of this episode, we said the Browns could go either receiver or offensive line. Those are their two positions of need. Obviously, their defense is good. We look at it, hey, like their defense is one of the best units, and they definitely need help on this offense a little bit. But again, this team could definitely ride their defense. But with all the quarterbacks they have in their room, and again, we don't know how it's going to pan out. And if anything, you're going to need to help out these quarterbacks for sure because again, they are definitely not blue chip talents, and they're definitely all basically their future success is riding on this year. I have them going Caleb Lomu. Again, you're getting a tackle, you're getting a premier position on the line. You're also getting a player from an offensive line that was arguably the best offensive line in college football. Even when they weren't the best team in college football, Utah had this identity of dominating the trenches, and they've done that on a multitude of games with a running quarterback and a really good run game. So I like Caleb Lomu again. The only thing you could argue with him was he on the opposite side of Spencer Fanu that dictate a lot of success on the offensive line. I do think he's a great player on his own right. He was lined up on the complete opposite side, helping out that unit. I do think again offensive line, receiver, weapon is really the only thing the Browns need, which is kind of crazy to say for a team picking at six. Again, obviously, I need a quarterback. That just isn't going to happen in this draft. Again, at least not in the first round. So I've been going Caleb Lomu.
Yeah, don't have a problem with it. I mean, again, another team that has multiple first round picks. You know, we talked about it already. Defense is in a good spot. The offense is really what they got to try to improve. Whether it's the offensive line with another pass catcher. So don't have a problem with this pick either.
And then also, like a thing I wanted to highlight just with that pick in general. Again, who knows what happens with Travis Hunter? Jaguars are going to trade up a lot of the Browns to get him. Obviously, this first round pick was involved, but again, for a lot of people, again, I was high on the Jaguars, little biased there, but a lot of people weren't. Again, this was a pick that could have definitely ended up being in the top 10. So I think the Jaguars definitely win out by having this really good season. This pick only being at 24. Again, I think the Browns were again hoping for a top end pick that they didn't get. Um, Now we get into 25. Another team that again doesn't really have too many needs. I have them going Caden McDonald. I think again for them and their needs, I think this was the best player available for them. Obviously, he has a great pedigree coming from Ohio State. But at the same time, they could use defensive line work, I think, for sure. The defense was a little bit suspect at times. I think the biggest thing with Caleb Williams and this Bears team, again, they sure up this offensive line. This offensive line became worse from to really being one of the best units in the NFL. And I don't think they need another weapon by any means. Because I think they're going to really let the young players that they drafted pretty high in recent years see how those players develop. Obviously, Colston Loveland finished the season strong. Roma Dunze, another guy that got drafted with a top pick. So again, they have those type of players. And again, obviously they can't select a running back here. We're pretty high on Kyle Monogany. We think he could be serviceable for another year along with DeAndre Swift. So again, I think this was definitely a need for them on the defensive side of the ball. They could go different ways though. They could go safety or something, but I had them going Caden McDonald. I think he's the best defensive player available at this pick from what we have at this point.
Yeah, I feel like for the Bears, it's. I mean, unless like they do something that we don't expect, but I feel like this is a selection where they go with a defensive player. Um, Defense definitely wasn't. I mean, obviously they did win the division. Caleb Williams, great in year two. I feel like the defense lacked at some points. And I feel like that's an area, that's a side of the ball that does need improvement. Although they did, invest in it. They did bring in some guys on the defensive line. But yeah, I think going with a defensive player, I think that's the right move for them. And if they could shore up the defense, I mean, this is gonna be a very good team once again with the Bears going into 2026.
All right, now we get into number 26, and I do believe the Buffalo Bills do win out if this player is there. It's just a question of if he's there. Obviously, you were talking about yesterday how there's a possibility that this player could go to the Eagles just based on what they do with AJ Brown. So that's going to definitely determine a couple of things. But we were talking about yesterday how we don't think this player is that far off from the receiver selected in the top three. So in the top three of their position. So we're going with Denzel Boston at number 26 to the Buffalo Bills. There's absolutely no doubt that Josh Allen needs a pass catching weapon. I'm not like insanely low in their pass catchers, but they're only secondary pass options at best. Like they're not going to be wide receiver ones. Whether you look at Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, or others, the only reason this has worked is just of how amazing of a quarterback Josh Allen is. But they definitely need a guy that could really be a wide receiver one. When we look at Denzel Boston and why we are so high on him, I believe again very similar to Tethra McMillan last year. I think a lot of things that this guy again is knocked for I'm not necessarily straight off of him by any means. This guy is a 6'4 receiver that produced double digit touchdowns, 20 plus touchdowns in 2 seasons. So, again, he does have that red zone capability. Not only that, a lot of people are saying that he's going to run a slow time, whether it's a 4.47 or, again, 5.2 time. But I think Denzel Boston, again, if you show the ability to get open at his size, I think he does. I think, again, there is no need to worry about how fast the player is. Again, we talked about how that notion, again, whether we look at Jackson the Jigba or other receivers, again, if you have the ability to get open, the speed shouldn't necessarily be that much of a factor to stray you off a receiver. Not only that, for this receiver at 6'4 to have the ability to play inside and outside, I think is absolutely huge. You don't see that again in the recent NFL. So I think that which makes him unique as well. A guy that could play all three receiver positions, and this is just a perfect fit for the Buffalo Bills. It's just if he's going to be there, this pick. If they're going to have to trade up for him, whatever the case may be, I absolutely love Denzel Boston at this pick.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. The Bills definitely need another pass catcher for Josh Allen. Defense definitely needs some work. I know they did invest on the defensive line last offseason. They brought in Joey Bosa, some other defensive linemen as well. The secondary, I would think, was a huge issue in the postseason as well. Against Denver, a lot of those big plays, a lot of those key third downs where they needed to make stops, guys were wide open. That I think that's another area the Bills need to address there. Obviously, Sean McDermott, sorry, not Doug McDermott. They got Joe Brady now with McDermott being out. It'll be interesting to see if they go more offense now, promoting their offensive coordinator. But Pass catcher is definitely something they need to address because, again, last couple of years, you're bringing in Amari Cooper, you're bringing in Brandon Cooks, some veteran receivers. They need a true number one receiver back in that offense again. And maybe they still believe in Keon Coleman. I know there was a lot of talk about him after the season. A discrepancy whether the coaching staff really wanted him, the front office, people getting thrown under the bus for that pick. Um, so yeah, but I think pass catcher, but the defense definitely needs some work as well.
Now we get into pick number 27. I believe this pick was an absolute home run value wise. Again, the mocks and everything has him lower than I think he is. I thought he was an absolute game changer for Miami. I thought he was a great partner alongside Ruben Bain. I'm going with Akeem Mesidor at 27 for the San Francisco 49ers. I think this is kind of like exactly what they need again. You look at another team very similar to the Bucks, a lot of positions kind of aging out or getting injured when you look at again their key playmakers on the defensive side of the ball being injured all year long. I think they could definitely use a younger player, especially on the edge, a position of value, to help out this defense a lot. Because again, I don't know how much longer you're going to ride on some of these key playmakers. Just because again, like very similar to the Bucks, they could have a good season next year or the year after, but that's about it. Like this window for a lot of these players in the 49ers are shortening. But I like Akeem Mesidor a lot. Like again, I believe he was an absolute game changer. Made arguably the best defensive in college football. What it was, obviously, again, Ruben Bain gets a lot of the shine. Him lining up alongside him, but this guy again, don't be fooled because Ruben Bain was on this defense. Like this guy was also a freak as well.
Yeah, I mean the veteran players they have on the defensive side of the ball. I mean Fred Warner getting hurt. I mean Nick Bosa now has had two ACL tears now in his NFL career. They definitely need some more depth at that position on the defensive line. Maybe some secondary help. It's the 49ers, they had a very good season, but they're not the same, juggernaut that they were a couple years ago. They still got some good offensive players, obviously, with McCaffrey. Brock Purdy had a good year when he was healthy. But again, they're not that juggernaut that they were from a couple years ago. So they need some more youth on this team. And now with Robert Sala, taking on the job in Tennessee, new defensive coordinator once again. So with the healthy Bosa and a healthy Warner next year, obviously that's going to help them. But you definitely need some more surrounding pieces that can be impactful in case those guys go down again.
Now we get into pick number 28, and as a fan of this team, I have watched him a lot, and I think this player is, again, a really good option. And I think it's kind of exactly what the team needs. For the Houston going Emmanuel pregnant now, again, like you guys are seeing on your screen, he is a little bit lower in the mock than people think, but I do think he's a first round talent. For Emmanuel Pregnant, obviously coming over from the transfer portal to Oregon, I believe he helped shore up this offensive line for sure. And you also look at an offensive line where he definitely had a ton of work cut out for him. His offensive line, again, whether they were playing a running game, a passing game. They had 3, 4 running backs in their cycle. And then also, again, they had a player in Dante Moore that definitely loved to pass the ball as well. I believe him being in like this pro stop program would definitely help him going into Houston. Houston definitely needs the offensive line work, no doubt. But at the same time, I kind of believe their offensive line was really bad. And I said this in the beginning of this year when we did a podcast. Like, I don't think you can just like wipe out a whole offensive line and then bring a whole new offensive line in. I do believe there has to be continuity at that position. Again, those players on the offensive line, they definitely weren't premier players. But at the same time, again, you have to be able to keep one or two players on an offensive line. You can't completely wipe out the unit. When we look at the Texans on defense, obviously we talked about how we were on this defense. This defense was one of the best units in the last 5 years. But I do want to also tell people when you're going into this NFL draft, there is a possibility that Houston does go defense with a high pick. We get it, they were this insane unit, but at the same time, they do have a lot of people to pay on the defense, and I don't think every single one of them is going to get paid. So that also is going to leave some holes on his defense where they could go. I do like their pass catchers. Obviously, they have a need at running back, but that just isn't going to happen at this pick. Emmanuel Pregnant, I think, is the pick here, or just again an offensive lineman in general.
Yeah, the offensive line for the Texans has kind of been, shaky. And then they went and traded Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders before the season started, which we all kind of thought was a little bit of a head scratcher. But yeah, I feel like with defense, I mean, have one of the best defenses in the league. Some of the guys, they might not have next year, depending on free agency. So maybe, you address that. But yeah, offensive line, no problem with that area being addressed with their first pick.
Now this next pick for the Rams, it was a little debate for me. So again, the Rams the last couple of years, a lot of people were thinking they could go quarterback. This would be the perfect spot to take Ty Simpson if they were able to do that. Part of me kind of thinks them taking quarterback. I know they could have a quarterback develop in the system for a year or two, but a lot of people for me, I kind of just think that's like a rumor that just like is not going to happen because again, this team is constantly contending, and I think they could kind of use pieces that could help them like right now. I have them going Monroe Freeling again with a lot of these picks and a lot of these tackles. As you keep going down and down the board, there is more risk of if they're going to be like a guaranteed player or not. But Monroe Freeling, I don't really mind at this pick again. They could use a tackle position. Again, the biggest debate for me with this pick was I going to double up and make them go defensive back two times, which I think is completely viable. Like we said, they have a ton of holes in this secondary, but I've been going Monroe Freeling again. Matthew Stafford is getting older, and they do need to continue to protect him. Again, this offensive line isn't horrible by any means, but they could use another piece. I like Monroe Freeling here, and again, it could be again in Ty Simpson's range if that's just not like a rumor, and they do eventually go with a quarterback to back up Matt Stafford one of these years. But again, I know you could agree with this. We've been hearing this 2, 3 years in a row now that they were in range of going for a quarterback to back up Matt Stafford, and it just never happens.
Yeah, I mean, we could also see them maybe like trade out of this pick too if somebody wants to trade up and get somebody towards the end of the first round. They did have Havenstein, their right tackle, retire, so adding making a selection to the offensive line, I don't think is a bad choice. And again, you have the older quarterback in Matthew Stafford, so yeah, got to protect Stafford by any means necessary. Again, wouldn't be opposed to going two players at the same position. You take two corners to address the secondary. Don't have a problem with that either. But yeah, again, especially when you have one of these quarterbacks in the twilight of their career, you want to make sure they're protected. So don't have a problem with that.
Now, as we wind things down to like the legit, real Super Bowl contenders, 30, 31, 32 teams that really made it all the way to the end of the season, pretty much. For the Broncos and the Patriots, I do think they are both in very similar spots. I do think they could use an offensive piece. I do think their defenses are truly elite. But unfortunately for the Broncos and the Patriots in this mock draft, I believe once you get past Kenyon Sadiq and Denzel Boston, I don't think any offensive weapons are really worth the first round pick. Again, you see Casey Concepcion in this list. I think you could go Casey Concepcion here, and it is viable. I would just wait for the second round to draft one of these receivers, whether it's a Casey Concepcion, whether it's a Chris Bell, obviously Omar Cooper Jr. You see here, and then we talked about Zachariah Branch yesterday. I think those are guys are more second round picks that you're splitting hairs. I wouldn't use a first round value on them. So for the Broncos, even though they do have a pretty insane defense, um, I did have them going CJ Allen here again. He played a part for a great defensive coach in Kirby Smart. I do think he's NFL ready to contribute right now. Obviously, the defensive unit is great, but again, if you just constantly stack this defense could be a juggernaut. And again, they don't really need offensive line help. Again, I guess it says center. You could go center here, but they don't really need offensive line help. And I don't think the playmakers right now are worthy of a first round pick. Again, if it's going to be anybody, probably going to
And
be
the pass catchers that they have aren't that bad either.
yeah, like
So
it could be Casey Concepcion, I guess, but I'm just stacking them
I
with
could
the
see it more so for the Patriots if they went with a playmaker than the Broncos.
yeah. But yeah, I had TJ Allen there. Then we can just go straight into the Patriots at 31. Very similar spot. I kind of again think their defense is really good, but I do think their defense does have a hole on the edge. Because again, you look at the interior pressure that they were getting throughout this playoffs. Again, they do have great interior defensive linemen, but I do think they have a hole on the edge. I went R. Mason Thomas out of Oklahoma at the edge position. Again, you could see, like you just said, them going wide receiver, but at the same time, I kind of think they're going to be in the market for a receiver that's a little more viable. Like again, if they can't secure Denzel Burke, um, I think they're gonna go for like a little bit more of established receiver. I heard again, if they don't get if the Cowboys don't whatever get George Pickens, I think they could be in the market for that. Again, I just don't know if they're gonna, or they could be in the trade market for AJ Brown as well.
I
I
feel
don't
like
know.
that's probably more likely. I think the Cowboys are probably gonna franchise tag Pickens. So, but yeah, AJ Brown definitely, especially with the Mike Vrabel connection too,
Like I
that could
just
be an
don't see
option.
them taking a shot on like somebody that's maybe value isn't there. And I do think they have this needed edge, so I went with Mason Thomas, but yeah.
Yeah, no, they could definitely do that. Obviously the offensive line struggled in the Super Bowl, so maybe that's where they go as well. Um, but yeah, I don't have a problem with that pick.
And then at number 32, even though again you're looking at another defense that is great, I do believe they're gonna have a hole this off season. So I do go with Brandon Cease here from South Carolina because Tariq Woolen is a free agent, and then also at the same time, this this defensive unit could use outside cornerbacks, teams that develop into outside corner players that develop into outside cornerbacks. So I do think it's going to be a need. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a guarantee that they do get Tariq Woolen back. I do think they could use that. But again, you're looking at the Super Bowl champions. You're looking at again teams that do have weapons on offense. You're looking at again they have their quarterback. They have a great defensive unit. You could really go again a lot of different ways with this pick. I have Brandon Teach because again I don't know if Tariq Woolen's going to be back.
Yeah, Woolen's a free agent. Kobe Bryant's a free agent, and Josh Jobe is also a free agent too. So that's three guys in your secondary, and we'll see if they bring some of them back. They're probably not bringing all of them back. So yeah, secondary that could definitely be a position that they end up addressing in the first round.
So yeah, that pretty much wraps up this episode from picks 1 to 32 in our early mock draft. Very interesting to see. I would love to see in any comments below if people think Kai Simpson is going to go within the first round. I think that's pretty interesting. Again, I think he's the best quarterback in the draft, which is a hot take, but again, it's very interesting to see. Again, it's probably going to be between the 16 to 32 range, but is like the demand gonna like outweigh the supply, and you're gonna see Ty Simpson get drafted. We'll see about that. Yeah, Alex, you want to finish this off?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. And like we said in the very beginning, of this episode. We'll do another one post free agency and more close to the draft, which will definitely be different than what you see up here. Obviously, a little bit on the longer side, but that's what tends to happen when you get two of us doing a podcast together. So make sure to let us know how accurate we were in your eyes or how inaccurate we were in your eyes, because I know there's definitely going to be opinions for both sides. So yeah, no, it was a great little breakdown, early mock draft before we get to the real thing in a couple months.
Yep, and yeah, that wraps up this episode of Infinite Sports and Sloppy Saturdays, I guess. And yeah, we're gonna continue to keep doing more and more NFL draft stuff for you guys. Obviously, again, like we mentioned in the beginning, with me being in college football podcast, you being in primarily NFL podcast, NFL draft time is really the time where we could both like combine what we do into one. So we're going to go heavy into the NFL draft. So keep looking out for more content from the both of us. And that's pretty much it. We're out.